Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about Damnation, a festival that takes place at the Leeds University. You've probably heard of it. It was my second time there. I wish, to be honest, after these 2 years that I've been more. I can certainly see it becoming an annual pilgrimage for myself because it's just a wonderful festival. The bar of quality this year was absolutely sky high, so bear in mind that even though I'm going to be critical about some of the bands, everything that I saw was at the very least great. When I got there, it was a bit rainy, it was a bit miserable, to be honest, because it's Yorkshire and it was November, so it's going to be like that. So I was desperate to get in quickly, but there was a huge queue, so it meant that by the time I actually got in, I had to make a decision one way or the other about the clashes. I couldn't see both bands. So I elected to go and see God Eater. Now, for God Eater, the room was pretty full, even though there were a lot of people still outside. Unfortunately, the audience stood pretty still, and this is probably because God Eater were lacking in a certain amount of energy, at least on-stage energy, because musically they're incredibly tight, incredibly proficient. Their vegan and ecologically minded grindcore is an absolute treat to listen to. They just need to work on their stage show a little bit more, really. All that being said, they do play with verve, and the sonic battery was really something refreshing. It blew out the cobwebs of the night before and got the festival off to a great start. Next up, it was time for some lunch, quite frankly, because I'd been travelling since very early in the morning and hadn't had any breakfast. So the next band I saw were Dawn Raid. The room, by the time I got there, which was before their set started, I will add, was absolutely heaving. It was so full, and you can understand why, because the band have made a bit of a name for themselves over the last year, especially with the release of their second album, Behold Sedition Plainsong, which I think is great, and their staunchly anti-fascist and anarchist views. It's not something you see all that often in black metal. You see it sometimes, but it's not the predominant ideology. So I guess with that, it's almost something of a novelty. Fortunately, that idea of novelty was completely blown out the window by their ferocious set. The intricate guitar work and the delicate yet triumphant violin, all alongside these incredible blasts of hypersonic percussion, just makes it an absolute treat. It was a triumph. The sound did them some favours as well, because it helped their already massive sound, I must say, fill that room even more. You'd think for a band with no bass that they'd be lacking the low end and it'd be a bit like the sort of biscuit tin, wiry, early black metal guitars, but it's really not. It is a full-bodied sound that really does make you take notice. It's a real impact deep in the chest. I quote, "We're fucking raging speedhorn." Pretty good summary of the old stalwarts, the old reliable that have turned up to Damnation once again. The no-frills sludgy new metal band may not be the most dynamic or the most daringly inventive band, but good God, they know how to put on a party. The room is just over half full. They're opening the main stage, I might add. And pretty much everyone in the room hangs on their every word, and every note played, of course. It's the first time of the day we see circle pits and the first crowd surfer, so they've got that achievement under their belt there. The absolutely whooping crowd oblige their every whim, and it's a nice upbeat diversion from what is generally quite a bleak set otherwise, musically speaking, of course. A Freddie Mercury-style call and response of "Ayo," and so on. I'm not going to do the whole thing. Just lets you know that it's time to get down, and it's time to love everything that metal is all about. The Oregon-born progressive sludge band Lord Dying were up next on the Eyesore merch stage. They certainly fill the sludge portion of their Facebook description. The riffs are incredibly dirty, they're grimy, they're quite heavy, lumbering around the room and filling it with pretty much with ease, really. I can't speak. And they're not prog, but they are progressively minded. They interweave different time signatures and rhythmic changes with, again, ease. They do it really proficiently. It's all done in a framework of rock and roll, but the way they attack their instruments is more like a hardcore band. They really do assault their instruments, and they play them bloody well. The barked vocals also lend credence to this hardcore comparison, and it's a good thing that they do bark, because with their low-slung instrumentation, if there was a roar or a growl, you feel that it might get lost, but instead the bark cuts through the din. So it just gives you a little melodic hook to catch on to. The set is rather dynamic, but it lacks a certain sense of urgency, a sense of energy. But that's not to say it was bad. As I said at the beginning in the little preamble, the quality of this festival, the bar was set just incredibly high this year. A technically proficient take on the genre and a very capable display. If you like death metal, chances are you already do or you really will like Blood Red Throne. The Hulking Quintet's battering music barrages the nearly full second stage and is played intricately and with technical proficiency, even if it is somewhat derivative of classic generic death metal. It is classic or generic death metal done to a very high standard, of course, and they play with a visceral aplomb. There's no ancillary instrumentation, it's very lean slabs of death metal. There's no room for safety, no meandering passages that are the eye in the proverbial storm for you to take safe haven in. They just instead err on the side of a hypersonic blast of violent intensity that is as violent as it is borderline brilliant. It's a tight set that borders on almost over-rehearsed. It loses a slight sense of danger that you'd expect with the genre, but their frontman Yngve Bolt Christiansen, with his low baritone growl that's very Cookie Monster, makes the set scintillating and unpredictable. For some unknown reason, could have been killing time or maybe going out for some lunch, I was absent for a portion of the festival. Can't imagine why that was. Being a solo artist equipped with a cello and loop pedals is a unique proposition, even for a festival as eclectic as Damnation. But god damn was Joe Quayle incredible. Incredible, beautiful, neoclassical avant-garde sound fills the room with this hearty burst of symphonic goodness. There's a jaunty side of her work that lets you just enjoy it on a base level, but it's in the dark, subtle, more deep, more introspective moments that Quayle really shines. Layer upon layer of dexterous musicianship is built into these miniature symphonies that just are incredible. It makes you want to be a classical fan more than an extreme metal fan. I had to leave halfway through the set to go and see another band, I'll come to them in a minute, but during the set she promised that there would be guests, and I did see one, which was Nick Sampson, who joined for guitar on Mandrel Cantus and played a blistering solo that is also on the recorded version that you can hear. The crowd got absolutely wild for the skillful performances on stage, and there's something really heartening about seeing a performer who loves her work as much as Joe Quayle. You can see her almost laugh in disbelief at the ridiculous notion that a bunch of black-clad extreme metal fans would act with such reverence towards her incredible music. She's loving it, we're all loving it. I'd also like to point out Rhea Pavan, in which she showcases the percussive side of her instrument, just tapping against the strings and against the neck of the cello to create this bass layer around which the whole symphony can coalesce. It's just another moment of solemnity in a set that is exemplary. So I said I left Joe Quayle halfway through, and that's because I really, really wanted to see, and I'm really glad I did see, the captivating and experimental Inter Arma. They perform an utterly magnetic set with two stunning albums to pull from, most recently this year's Sulphur English. They never put a foot wrong in their lumbering, intense music that's built on dynamism and acerbic groove. The peaks and troughs of their loud, quiet dynamic allow for these horrific blasts of intensity and then these whisper-quiet baritone edicts that are thunderous, even though they are very, very low. There's a surprising element in the quietness that reminded me of post-punk, mainly a la Joy Division, and you can't say that any other band at Damnation this year was embodying the work of Ian Curtis, so Inter Arma are certainly incredibly unique. Not incredibly unique, you can't justify unique. Unique is a single word. Sprawling, dissonant and atonal epics never lose their lustre despite their long run times. It's a marvel to watch and a challenge to endure. As the five men hurl themselves into this incredibly violent but also quite reflexive music, you get the sense that you're not just watching a musical performance, you're watching something that is very true to them. There's something very nakedly honest about it. Something carnal, something very intense, something dark. Whatever it was utterly incredible. One of the performances of the festival. A terrifically large crowd greets Primordial over on the main stage. Kind kind of black and doom with a Celtic flair band open their set absolutely wondrously with their frontman Alan Averill Nemthianga, I think is his stage name, acting with this. It reminded me of Dave Hunt from Anal Nathrak. He's got this sort of Shakespearean theatrics to him, this almost campness that's quite endearing of the band. The whole band play charismatically and cohesively. They are working as a tight unit to fulfill a single purpose, which is to raise hell in the most homegrown of manners. I'll be honest, I don't know a great deal about Primordial and I'm not particularly au fait with their work. I could tell they were playing more modern stuff to start with, because when the classics drops, the room just erupted into rapture. It's a cohesive set that flows really well together, bar technical difficulties and nail their tongues that just can't be helped. They provided a bridge between the progressive and the extreme, and they just made sense on today's bill. Dreamy, histrionic vocals and ethereal clean passages don't exactly scream damnation, but there's a duality to Nige's vocal performance that makes Alcest a really fitting band to be here. They're representing the genre that they created, black gaze, and if you're gonna book a black gaze band, you might as well book the kings of it. It's in the abstruse interplay between light and dark that you can hear on all their albums, most recently Spiritual Instinct, which you may have seen our review of, that Alcest find their niche that makes them an apt booking for this festival. New songs like Protection sound utterly glorious, but the more road-weary and tested material is as meticulous and honed as Alcest would want it to be. Everything they do is just beautiful, it's just borderline celestial, it feels otherworldly getting to watch this band. You feel privileged getting to watch this band. As black gaze seems to grow exponentially year on year, it would seem that Alcest are still the kings of the genre. Now, unfortunately, I had to go to my hotel because I had to check in by 9 and there was no other time to go, which was a real shame, but the reason I went at this time was because I know that Gar's Word and Mayhem are hopefully, being reviewed by someone else at their London show or somewhere else on this tour. So I didn't feel awful about missing them in terms of delivering a review, just felt awful about missing them because I want to see those bands. So the next band I saw were backlit only by a vicious strobe light for 99% of their set, and it made the whole thing feel that much more esoteric and enigmatic and ferocious, and that band were Venom Prison. The set was unfriendly on the eyes and obviously unfriendly on the ears because death metal is wont to do that, and they batter the fit-to-burst room into submission with their oral menace. Material from both Animus and second album Samsara sound colossal. Personally, I preferred the material from Animus, but that's probably just familiarity. Also the fact that it sounds just slightly tighter. It's not that they're not familiar with the material from Samsara, as Uterine Industrialization sounds utterly colossal, like massive. But obviously, if you've had these songs in your arsenal for 2 years, longer than others, then, you know, you're going to be a bit more familiar with it. Larissa Stupa delivers one speech throughout the set, which is a good thing. Unless you're Napalm Death, you want to avoid talking. And it's a real visceral gut punch, and it just has the intensity that their set does. Stupa herself is an incredible performer. The way she twists and bends in time with the music is almost inhuman. It looks like she's possessed, but aside from this contortion, she performs like a hardcore vocalist. She's running around the stage. She reminded me of Jacob Bannon with her boundless energy and her ability to goad the crowd into circle pits and crowd surfing. I was on the barrier, and during Uterine Industrialization, I'm sure I counted at least 7 crowd surfers, and these are not long songs. This isn't Opeth. She and the band are extraordinary, and when combined with the fierce lyrics that subvert the typical misogyny of death metal, you know that you're watching something really special. Based on the amount of people they drew and the incredible performance they performed, I can see this band headlining the festival in years to come. Clashing with the main stage headline is always a tough gig, but Imperial Triumphant perform with an incredible nous. The Avant-Garde black metalers from Brooklyn make their unusual music known from the very first notes. This isn't wiry, scabrous, icy cold black metal. This is full-bodied and has a fiery intensity. In terms of the dynamic textures, it's more Rotten Christ than it is Emperor, for example. It's more fire than ice. They play an impressive set of serpentine riffs and dexterous interplay between time signatures, rhythmic shifts, moods, textures, feelings, and they bring a powerful sense of dread to the room that doesn't let up for the majority of their set, or at least what I saw. It's a barrage of morbid instrumentation that isn't afraid to eschew conventions, and you can see for some in the crowd this doesn't quite work. The crowd react well, but it doesn't reflect on how incredible Imperial Triumphant are. The only shame about their sets is that they didn't have the brass that you can hear on their latest album, Var Luxury. Now, this is entirely forgivable and understandable because they are an underground touring outfit who have come from Brooklyn. This is the bookend of their first ever European tour. The reality is it just costs too much to get that many members over. And frankly, the set is pretty bloody good without it. Closing the third stage was never going to be an easy task, especially up against the main stage headliners. But Imperial Triumphant do it with a cool countercultural style. The virtuosic ability of the prog maestros Opeth cannot be overstated. With all the crystalline clarity of the recorded versions, they play this set that feels like you're listening to the records, but has a live element that is just utterly captivating. The smitten audience hang on Michael Lagerfeld's every word and note, and you can understand why he's such a revered frontman, and he's just so impressive. The fact that he can sing and occasionally scream these complex melodies whilst playing these guitar phrases that are just more complicated than a solo that I could write is just incredible. But that's not to forget the rest of the band. The rest of the band are absolutely brilliant. The drumming is so dexterous it would make Neil Peart think twice about his abilities. It hits every note in the right place and just elevates the music to a different level. The bass is full-bodied and gorgeous, and the keys bring a sense of that 1970s prog with their Hammond organ style. It's quite enjoyable, really. It gives you a pang of nostalgia. I was at the back of the room, obviously, because I'd come from Imperial Triumphant's set, and there were a few naysayers back there who were basically just calling for older material. But if they had bowed to audience pressure, that wouldn't be what Opeth are all about. They're not a band built on compromise. They're a band that do their own thing. They talk the talk and walk the walk, and they've never made any compromises throughout their career, and that's probably why they're so revered as they are. That being said, when old material does drop, it sends the room into an absolute frenzy. This was my first time seeing Opeth, and it's definitely not going to be my last, but I can tell that even on their worst day, they'd be hard to knock. Today was definitely not their worst day. Today was utterly sublime. They just showcased everything that's great about heavy, intelligent music, and that's the reason you go to Damnation. You want your love of everything extreme and inventive to be affirmed, and this year definitely did that for me. Opeth's brilliance incarnate was impossible to overstate, and as the final note stops everything on a dime with a bright flash of white light, you feel like you just witnessed something very special. There was one final treat for the sparse crowd of night owls who were willing for a little bit more after Opeth's set, and that was the enigmatic horror synthwave of Ghost. The crowd did grow slowly over the course of their set, namely after when Opeth had finished their mammoth 90 minutes, but it never gets as full as the second stage had been all day. But it's understandable because people have got to get home, and it was gone midnight. Ghost performed till 1am. Beginning with Relentless Passing from new album Valediction, there's an immediate just blast of black metal intensity. There's this horrific screaming that comes your way, and it gels very well with everything that has gone on in the festival before. But then there's that John Carpenter, slightly perturbatory kind of, even though I think Ghost outdate Perturbator, but that kind of synthy Duran Duran meets mid-period Depeche Mode kind of verse, and it means that shapes are thrown as well as heads being banged. It doesn't feel so much like an after party as it was billed, more like a set that just didn't make sense during the day, but it's a nice way to round out the festival, apart from a couple of gripes. The clean vocals need refining, although there is a Gary Newman-esque charm to the sort of ramshackle nature of them. But the main one is that after a day of live music, it felt a shame that the two of them were basically playing to backing tracks. It felt weird to round out this day of celebrating real music being played by real people with real music being played by a computer. In spite of these gripes, as I said at the beginning, the bar of quality was so high for Damnation, and Ghost lived up to it. There's something incredibly alluring about the devilish dance of the music they create. And that's it. That's another year of Damnation down. Obviously, there were some bands I missed. Did you go? Who were your favourites? I'll be honest, my top three, I can't decide between them, were Joe Quayle, Inter Arma, and Alcest. I think they were all sublime performances. Definitely a minimum 9 out of 10. If you'd like to read the written review that's slightly more eloquent and a bit less rambling, then you can check it out on rocksins.com. There will be a direct link in the description. You should keep your eyes peeled on rocksins.com because there's always great stuff going up there. And we've just released our latest podcast, which has a discussion on S&M and S&M 2 by Metallica. Obviously, if you're here, you're probably more of a fan of extreme music, but I like Metallica as well as Extremity, so why can't you? If you enjoyed this incredibly long video, I assume because it's taken me a long time to record it, then drop a like, feel free to subscribe if you like, if you enjoyed what you saw. There will be more festival stuff coming up as and when they happen. Obviously, most of the festivals are done till summertime now, but there'll be gig and live reviews, there'll be album reviews coming up here, there'll be the weekly news show, there'll be loads of stuff for you to enjoy. All that brings me to say thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and tell me who you think is going to be playing Damnation 2020. I'm definitely going to be going regardless of the lineup, but I'm curious to see what more dyed-in-the-wool fans of the festival think will happen. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.